I saw this past week. I don't know how I found it, but it was when conspiracy theories became conspiracy facts. And I think it's a good framework before we get into the political section. Oh, what are you looking at?
That's what rebunked is. That's the term rebunked, right? Hashtag rebunked, right? Here you go.
Yeah, so conspiracy theories becoming conspiracy facts, things that you thought weren't true because it was a conspiracy theory, and then you look into it and it's like, oh, I guess that is true, and there's a reason that they tell everyone it's not true because they're criminals. They're criminals. They're trafficking children, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, we're going to get into it, and then we have a very interesting video. It's called "I Scanned a Democrat and Republican's Brains," and it's a pretty interesting theory that just from a brain scan on screen, you could tell someone's political persuasion, and then when you dig into it, it has either like concern over things you need to live and survive, or it has triggered by fear. So the one with the bigger amygdala that feeds on fear all the time is going to be the leftist, progressive, Democrat type of situation, which I thought was pretty interesting. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the results. I don't plan to be in either of these scans. My brain would look different than both of them. And I don't want it to be studied like that. So let's just go into the clips and check it out for ourselves. And then we have some interesting firearms news from the left, who is giving us a display of safety and proper handling of firearms. And you know I'm being sarcastic, so we'll get to it in a minute. But let's go to this block.
The earth is flat, and it's hollow, and full of frosting. The firmament ain't mint, it's spicy.
Wow, that's a new one.
Are you guys with this lunatic?
Look, we're just supporting our friend, doing what he loves.
Yeah, plus if he doesn't tire himself out, he's spamming the group chat all night, so...
Conspiracy theorists like him are destroying the country.
He's actually the least harmful kind of conspiracy theorist. Conspiracy theories are sometimes true and they're sometimes false. When people are peddling completely insane nonsense, it's a lot easier to write them off. What's far more frightening are the falsehoods spread by major institutions, and the idea that disagreeing with those major institutions puts a person in the same category as our friend here.
The Irish are beaming us with their druid space taters. Conspiracy theories are sometimes true? What are you, nuts?
No, plenty of things that were considered conspiracy theories have turned out to be true. For example, during the 2020 election, we were repeatedly told the Hunter Biden laptop story was fake. 51 intelligence officials signed onto a letter suggesting it was Russian disinformation, but it was later admitted that the laptop was real and that those agents misled us. According to polling data, this may have played a hand in altering the results of the election.
Oh, more Republican talking points.
This isn't a partisan point of view. Plenty of conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true have had nothing to do with any specific political agenda. Japanese Unit 731 performed horrific experiments on living human beings, almost all of whom were vivisected, and many of its high-ranking officers were granted full immunity by the US government in exchange for data they gained on biological and chemical weapons.
What? That's horrible. But how is that a conspiracy?
Our government covered up horrific crimes against humanity for their own benefit. The communist Russians first blew the whistle, but of course they also gave lighter sentences to members of 731 to get information.
With communists, every accusation is an admission.
Let's not forget the communists on the moon mining all the cheese.
Do you actually believe that one?
Yeah, I was just trying it out for size. Okay, so that one's not true.
Nah, but this one is. Back in 1990, a 15-year-old girl named Nayyirah testified in front of Congress, saying she saw Iraqi soldiers remove babies from incubators just to watch them die. This aired on 700 TV stations, and Bush Sr. repeated it 10 times, but it was a complete and total fabrication. Nayyirah was the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S., who had been working with the Kuwaiti government to promote U.S. involvement in the Gulf War.
Fine, so some conspiracies turn out to be true, but that doesn't mean lunatics like him should get to repeat the crazy ones.
The problem is all conspiracy theories are made to sound crazy before it's proven they're true. Heck, sometimes they're even called crazy after it's proven they're true. Maybe instead of seeing the term conspiracy theory as an indication of falsehood, we should evaluate claims on the basis of the evidence that exists for them and trust that the truth will prevail. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen.
I got the most Democrat and the most Republican two people I could find. These are them. And today, I'm going to be scanning their brains.
And this is Frank, a political scientist who's going to be looking at both of their brain scans and seeing if he can guess which is the Democrat and which is the Republican, just using their brains.
First, meet participant 1.
Hi, I'm participant 1. I'm 22 years old and originally from North Dakota.
And for our second scan, meet participant 2.
Hello, I'm participant 2, and I'm 19 years old, and I'm from LA.
One of them is a Democrat and one is a Republican, and Frank will be using only their brains to tell which is which.
Frank will be waiting in this holding room while the two participants get scanned, and he'll see the results at the end. Now, participant 1 is going in the MRI, which is really just a giant magnetic brain scanner.
So the reason we chose Frank to do this is that in 2017, he worked on a study that showed the neurological differences between Democrat and Republican brains. So he should be an expert on telling the difference.
So this is just an illustration. We would normally have a lot of people. The idea here is that we have two extreme people on either side. Hopefully they represent the averages, but that might not necessarily be the case.
I'm so curious if Frank's gonna be able to guess correctly. This is crazy.
What I'm going to be using to make my guess today is the corticolimbic system, which is a pathway in the brain where there's an area called the amygdala, which is this kind of almond or walnut-sized part of the brain. And when the amygdala is larger, for example, we should expect that people have stronger emotional reactions to emotional stimuli in their environment, like threats or disgust.
This is where scan 1, the MRI, will come in.
So can you tell me, like, specifically, like, looking at the amygdala, I know that's one of the main parts that Frank is looking at. Like, do you think she has an above average size amygdala or an average size or below average size?
Compared to a young person of her age, because the amygdala does change as you age over time. So let's go right down the plane. So to me, her amygdala looked generous, like generous for a person.
So a little bigger than average?
I would say possibly.
Okay.
It's hard to say, like I said, because we see a wide range of people. And the amygdala is sort of like a jelly roll. It's rolled up onto itself at the head of the hippocampus here. So the size of it is really a volume displacement.
So as far as scan 1, the MRI, participant 1's amygdala was a bit big.
There's also one other part of the brain that Frank is going to be looking at.
So what the amygdala is connected to, that we're looking at here, is the anterior cingulate cortex, also called the ACC. So when we're looking at the ACC, what we would generally expect is that somebody with a larger ACC or a more active ACC is going to have a stronger reaction to if they're seeing something and then something happens that they didn't expect. Whereas somebody with a smaller ACC or less active is going to have less of a reaction if something unexpected happens.
Can we look at her anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC? And how do you think that size compares to normal?
I'd say normal, possibly maybe a little bit larger.
And their ACC was also a bit big. Interesting. I wanted to check in with participant 2, who was almost up to see how he was feeling.
Do you think that the professor is going to be able to guess correctly your political beliefs just off your brain scan?
I would say so, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I think I have pretty strong opinions on the issues I've been talking about for years. So the professor is going to look at my brain versus the other participant, and I think there's going to be a difference.
Okay, now it is participant 2's turn. Okay, cool. So now we're looking at that first scan.
So these are the subregions of the brain. Again, we're looking at the hippocampus along here. At the head of the hippocampus is the amygdala. So this is sub 1 again. We're back to the very first person that we imaged. And I'm going to just do the same thing where we'll slice down that subregion of the brain. Okay, so here's a really great shot of the amygdala. Those are quite generous. Yeah, I don't know. Those are really...
So his is pretty big?
Pretty thick. Mm-hmm.
How do you think it compares to the other one?
But it may be thicker. This may be actually thicker.
So his is a little bit bigger. Interesting. What about his ACC?
Let's see, that one is, again, it looks maybe a little small, but I don't know. It's hard to say.
So this participant's amygdala was even bigger, and their ACC was smaller.
Before we got participant 1 and participant 2 out of the scanners, we had them each do a second scan, called an fMRI.
An fMRI scan measures brain activity. For that scan, we're going to have a screen in the machine with them. The participants will see hypothetical political candidates in their party, and 10 position stances that would make sense for someone in that party to have, and 5 that don't.
For example, the Republican may see that this hypothetical person in their party supports universal health care.
The participants are then going to just think about how they feel about these stances, and those thoughts will also help Frank tell who's who. One of the parties in his studies tended to have more activity in their ACC when they would see the incongruent policy statements from the hypothetical candidates in their party, meaning the statements that don't make sense. This means they had some sort of an internal want to follow their party's lines a little closer, or at least that's what the study found. So the fMRI showing brain activity specifically in the ACC where your reaction to social norms is governed should also give Frank insight into which person belongs to which party.
It's impossible to communicate with participant 1 while she's in there unless we use these mics. She can't hear us, or could she hear us?
Not at all.
Yeah, she can't hear us right now, but she's currently looking at these political policy positions and still just thinking about how she feels about them.
There was obviously a lot of activity with the incongruent statements, but we would need to wait for the next participant to compare in order to get clear results.
Can you already start to look at the results?
I just have this really quick preliminary. It's only 1.5 millimeter resolution isotropic, so it's pretty poor quality.
So would you want to wait to look at things like that?
We need to wait another 2.5 minutes or so.
All good. While we're waiting, I want to tell you guys about Ground News. Regardless of if you're Democrat or Republican, you want to be getting the full picture when you receive your news. And with Ground News, you get just that.
Ground News is a website and an app on a mission to give readers a more data-driven and objective
News/Gordon for 40% off the same Vantage plan I use for the most unbiased news. And thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video.
So once participant 2's fMRI was complete, we got him out of the scanner. He also showed a lot of activity to the incongruent statements, but it would be up to Frank to decide who showed more.
Let's see if Frank can actually decipher political parties from this.
Hello. Yes, I am ready.
All right, let's do it. Come with me.
So basically what we know, so what we think is that having a larger amygdala, which is, in other words, like more gray matter volume in the amygdala, is associated with right-of-center politics, whereas more liberal or democratic people, it's associated with more volume in the anterior cingulate, or also called the ACC. Okay, and this is who? This is the first or second? Second. This is the second person. Okay.
Let's see if we look at the first person here.
It seems fuller here, right? Definitely. That's the first person. And then for amygdala...
This one, let's see if we come out to the side. I kind of see, trying to get that perfect image. It's like this thin area right here, so on that, see how it's not folded over.
And this is first participant still? Yeah, so it seems like maybe... So this would... So there is more, potentially, more ACC in the first participant, more amygdala in the second participant.
Okay. Looks like I think we could measure that.
But now it's time to look at scan 2, the fMRI.
So here's the function of the first person. I really didn't get much. I just see like one little area there.
Oh, wow. That's the first person.
That's the first person.
Okay.
But the second one seems to be really loaded with a lot of activity.
Oh, wow.
I really can't explain. There's a little bit of movement in this. I'd like
and this is the contrast from the incongruent to
exactly.
Congruent, right?
So that's all I was measuring.
So can you explain what the congruence piece actually means?
Yeah, so what we found in previous research was that Democrats had more ACC activity in responding to the incongruent trials, whereas Republicans still did that, but just to a lesser degree.
So for whatever reason, Republicans tended to almost care more or less about the party lines. It seems like less.
But and I don't know if care. We don't know what it means with the ACC.
But they would have less blood flow in their brain. Yeah.
So if I were going solely on the functional scans, I would probably guess that participant 2 was the Democrat. But I thought about it, and if I just know that there's been more data and more research on the structural differences.
Yeah.
And so if I had to guess, I would probably weigh that more, and I'd probably say participant 1 is the Democrat and participant 2 is the Republican.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think you've made your decision?
I do think I've made my decision. Yeah.
Okay. I'm very excited to see if you are correct. I mean, I know if you're correct, but we'll find out.
I'm ready. Yeah.
All right.
I'm confident.
Let's do it. Let's do this.
So I think participant 1 is the Democrat, and I think participant 2 is the Republican.
Okay, participant 1, please enter the room.
All right. Yes. The science is real.
And participant 2, you can also come in.
Nice to meet you guys.
I'm so glad that worked. Oh my goodness.
I will reiterate that there are people that don't line up with the findings sometimes. This was sort of what we would expect. Exactly. So thank you for having brains like that. We appreciate it.
So I think, given that result from the study, it might be phrased like this. If you show the Republican statements that are in line with their policies and then one that's not in line, they don't care as much. They ignore that. Whereas the Democrat gets annoyed or upset or frustrated about that thing. They were having more of an emotional response to it. Is that what you picked up, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we go any further, I have to say in the morning to all you out there, and that we also here on on Grand Theft World, we like to keep your amygdala the right size, perfectly appropriately sized here on Grand Theft World. But yeah,
Yeah, you need to care if something's not set up properly, but you don't need to like be in fear and all emotionally reactive to it. You just fix it.
Yep.
Just fix it, you know?
Yep. And
Doesn't
you know,
have to be like a big emotional ordeal. That's all.
exactly. And you know, it's so interesting how like really the solution to like so we fear things we don't understand, right? Things that are mysterious to us. I mean, that's just the nature of fear itself. But
and you'd be in a lot of fear if no one gave you a method to learn anything. Everything will be fearful to you.
Yes, and it's such an epidemic in our society because you know people don't know how to learn. People don't even understand the concept of learning. I'll admit that I didn't know, like I've never heard the word trivium until I got involved in the Grand Theft World community, right? I had no idea that this level of knowledge even existed. And so I took the logic course. And then after becoming an autonomy member, I took the trivium course, and I need to do it again and again, probably for it to really sink in. But these were all new concepts for me. The idea that there's a process to learning, that there's like a formula that goes back thousands of years that and it was just like the most mind blowing thing ever, because I was like, how is it that nobody even like explained that there's even a process to learning, right? And so I imagine,
real
therefore,
quick, let me just demystify it, because I could demystify it in 30 seconds, and then people don't have to see, like, if you don't have the money for autonomy, here's the secret. The 3-step method to learning anything is the same as any instruction manual you've ever used to put stuff together. Even with Legos, individual parts, how they fit together, how to use and troubleshoot the thing. If you learn the individual parts and understand how they fit together and remove the contradictions, you can learn anything or solve any mechanical problem that you set your mind to. We all have that capacity. It's not just for special people. It's for you to use in your life to benefit from that and live a lifestyle closer to liberty and less in tyranny and despotism and dependence. So, yeah, it's like do a kindness for yourself and others around you. Being capable and self-reliant is a good thing in this world where they want you to be dependent and broken and a clone of like it's like they found like the Thomas Crooks character and they cloned him and made like everybody like those. Like, yeah, there's some people with potential for high aptitude, but what they do in their life is not so constructive. It's called an invalid ethic. You can be well-intentioned, but if you don't get the consequences out that help the person and deliver the value and utility, you can't survive in the marketplace. So people need to learn those basics of literacy in entrepreneurism and self-reliance.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, it's really interesting though, because I wouldn't necessarily equivocate, you know, one side or the other to being more informed. It's like, okay, I've been to like I haven't been to a Trump rally, but I've been to probably the next closest thing, which is a Reawaken America tour, right?
Sure.
And like I'm like, there are sheep on both sides. I mean, I'm just telling
For
you
sure,
right
there's
now,
people
you know
that
what I
believe
mean?
some far out things on
Yeah,
both sides,
yeah.
and you can get like it's just cliche to go get the fringe of either side and show like because it doesn't represent the whole.
Yeah. And
No.
so I would even like say, so the interesting part of that though, you know, differentiating between the two, I would say that maybe like a conservative or what you'd call a Republican maybe has more of like a religious connotation, maybe like more faith, you know what I mean? Like maybe and so through faith, like whatever that is, whether it's religious or like some sort of spiritual practice, you know, a lot of times that alleviates a lot of, you know, you have faith and you have trust and you have a relationship with a creator and all this stuff that kind of does, in my experience, like alleviate some of that stress that would be causing some of those things that show up on the brain scan. Whereas, you know, an atheistic worldview is very dark and dim and glad. I'm not even going to say that because there's probably a lot of atheists listening right now, but it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. From my experience, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean,
probably just lost a lot of fans there, but whatever.
no, I mean, I would encourage people who think that there's nothing to religio spirituality, right? Something higher than yourself, something more complex than we can understand, right? I'd look at two things. Look at the spectrum of light and how only part of it's visible. The rest of it is like the background code that runs the whole operating system, right? The visible code's like the graphical user interface. You don't get the GUI without the background coding that makes that all possible. And to that point, with science, anything that we look into or inspect, we can expect to have knowledge and understanding, and that can kind of go on for layers and layers and layers. How can that be so consistent that we can be learning and the universe is continually revealing things that exist that we didn't know were there until we got to this level of aptitude to see the things that are built into it. And, the third is, Einstein said you have to make a fundamental decision whether the universe is a friendly or hostile place. And that is according to your free will and your choice. And you can choose either and make your world and your experience either one of those. So I chose to see that maybe the universe doesn't, like, maybe Einstein's wrong. Maybe it doesn't have to be friendly or hostile. Maybe the universe is just neutral. Maybe when I go out into nature, it doesn't want to kill me. But if I don't learn from nature and unpack the knowledge it has for me to purify water, catch food, and protect myself from the elements, I'm going to perish, and not very long. Right? If you jump into water and you can't swim, you got 3 minutes at the most before you're done deal. You need air every 3 minutes. You need food every 3 weeks. And in between, you got to have water every 3 days, right? Those are the threes of living. Universe expected us to learn numbers to communicate that to each other, words to communicate that to each other. Otherwise, you'd be hanging out with fur fangs and hiding from wolves and stuff still because you don't have tools. So, humans are learning machines. The universe is like an infinite access to data, but you have self-reliance and self-choice and free will and volition to direct your consciousness through this maze of data and make your own choices and learn how to take your own actions and judge your actions with the result of the consequences and improve and learn from there. So I don't know. Does that sound like it's an unconscious universe when all it does is kind of stimulate your ability to learn and grow into appreciating what this whole place is and how it works?
Yeah,
so that you can understand, so you can make better decisions and keep living, right? So like there's a whole convection current of causality, and I think atheism just cuts it in the middle and says we don't even think about the other half.
Sure. And it's been a really amazing journey for me, like along this like spiritual path, really. Cause like, at one point I didn't know, I didn't even put much thought into it, but as a person in recovery, we do talk a lot about like a higher power, you know what I mean? And then, I could do a whole dissertation on this, but really it's like, it's not even from a religious perspective when we're trying to help people with that, grasping that aspect. It's like literally, it's about helping people come to a relationship with something greater than yourself, right? You know what I mean? And it's just like this beautiful journey that means different things to different people. We don't put it in a box, and it's like it's whatever you want it to be, and it's a powerful thing to explore. Like one of my buddies who out in Oregon, he used to say this thing. He's like, because a lot of times people come to recovery and they have this hardened worldview, and they're like, how could a loving God do this to me? And they're very opposed to, the idea of any sort of like, energy force out there beyond what we see, and I'm one of my best friends, the lead singer of my old band, was like he's an atheist, and he's come to, it was interesting talking to him and his understanding of like, a spiritual plane and all this stuff. And, but what my friend used to say was like, he's like, can you hold out your hand and make an orange? And, you go, no. And it's like, okay, well then just pray to the orange maker, that life force, that creation force that can just generate these things just so magically. And it's just like, okay, yeah, there's obviously something bigger than we can even comprehend or explain, So I don't know. So maybe in that brain scan, maybe that particular individual has a little bit of that. And so it shows.
I mean, 20 years ago, I learned about agnosticism, right? It's invented by T.H. Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog. I didn't know that at the time, right? I didn't understand the eugenics or population control or the British Empire. But Huxley came up with agnosticism, or agnosticism, meaning you don't have knowledge yet. So do you have to make a decision right now on it? Like, can't you wait until you have knowledge on it? Right? So there was like a holding pattern. And so I was like, that's interesting, but that doesn't really fit my experience and belief system. So I was like, I can pick that up and inspect it and put it back down. Like, okay, that's cool. That's for you over there. So that might be a more respectable place to be like, I just reserve judgment because I don't have enough information about the problem. I haven't had time to look into it, right? So that's a respectable like rest stop. Whereas atheism's like a final destination type of situation. And you're making a decision and a judgment on maybe experiences you have yet to have and unfold because you don't open yourself up to them because you have a limitation on information you're willing to deal with, right? The other aspect is, as you were talking about, the juxtaposition between belief in God or a higher power or a creator or, architect, whatever you want to call it, man. They call it architect, and Matrix wasn't so friendly, right? Somebody
and Freemasonry,
decided,
right? And
Freemasonry, they decided it's not a friendly thing, right? I had a situation in college in philosophy class one time, and this is just kind of maybe illustrative or emblematic of my personality and how I operate. I might be a little bit of a contrarian sometimes. So the assignment from the atheist philosophy teacher, which I think is hysterical because philosophy is how you find truth. And this guy's like, I got the truth already. And so he's trying to enforce it on the class. So even if I was on his position, I wouldn't have gone for it, but I wasn't on his position. But I was more, agnostic and looking beyond Protestantism and Presbyterian, knowledge that I had from being raised, going to Sunday school. I was looking at like, what are the other flavors of Christianity? Who aren't Christian? What are the other world religions? All that sort of stuff, right? That was really where I started with a lot of self-study and trying to answer my own questions. So anyway, this guy, he says, we had these things called blue books, which is like a 30-page notebook or whatever, and you got to write out your thesis or you have to write in paragraphs. It's like a literature type thing. So he says, I want you to fill a blue book on why God doesn't exist. I usually don't take homework seriously, but I was like, I got to fill a blue book with why God doesn't exist. I don't know how to do that. So I wrote the opposite. I'm like, here's 30 pages on why God exists from all these different angles and yet to be, understood type things that keep showing up. And I got an F in that course. And it wasn't the last time I had to deal with that professor, but I dealt with him outside school instead of like at school. Anyway, I was a juvenile at one time. All right. So I just didn't like I didn't like the point he was trying to make. And you know what? At the end of the day, I'm paying you to teach me about philosophy. I'm not paying you to indoctrinate me into like your nonsense. And he was a bunch of nonsense. Anyway, I wouldn't have done that probably in a math class or calculus or anything like that, but it was philosophy and you're trying to indoctrinate. So anyway, I wasn't hip to that.
Everyone's doing some kind of self-help these days, and you can find a million self-help courses out there. Most other courses out there are hosting lectures. They're hosting videos. They're maybe even doing Q&As. And these are great starting points to encourage learning. But at Autonomy, we believe that hands-on practice is the best way to really lock in what we're learning. There's no better way to gain confidence and mastery than through action. After each lecture, we practice the concepts we've learned with other students, giving and receiving feedback in a non-judgmental environment. The result is mastery of concepts like entrepreneurship, ethical sales, and self-reliance in an environment that directly translates to the real world. Plus, you make connections with other like-minded individuals who are learning right alongside you, and you have a lifetime membership in the community. The Autonomy course with Richard Grove equips you with confidence, competence, and courage in a world filled with confusion and noise. You can learn more at getautonomy.info. We'll see you there.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, And this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false. This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.